Part 1. They say the mountains hold secrets. Not just the secrets of the earth, the slow, geological whispers of shifting tectonic plates and the relentless carving of glaciers, but secrets of a different kind. Secrets whispered by the wind through bamboo groves, secrets carried on the backs of hawks circling the jagged peaks. Secrets of men who sought something more than mortality, men who dared to bargain with forces beyond human comprehension. I saw one such secret. I saw the ritual that gave the samurai immortality, or so they believed. It began, as these stories often do, with a journey. A journey not measured in miles, but in years. Years of whispered rumors and cryptic clues, pieced together like fragments of a shattered mirror, each shard reflecting a distorted image of the truth. The rumors spoke of a hidden valley, shrouded in perpetual mist, where the veil between this world and the next was thin. A place where the ancient kami, the spirits of nature, still held sway. They spoke of a ritual, a dark sacrament performed under the pale light of a blood moon, a ritual that granted eternal life to those brave enough, or foolish enough, to undertake it. I, a humble scholar obsessed with unraveling the threads of history and folklore, was drawn to these whispers like a moth to a flickering flame. My quest for knowledge, for understanding, led me down a path few had dared to tread. A path that wound through shadowed forests and across treacherous mountain passes, each step taking me further from the known world and deeper into the realm of myth. For years I searched, poring over ancient texts, deciphering faded scrolls, questioning wizened villagers who clung to the old ways, their eyes holding the deep pools of forgotten wisdom. Many dismissed the tales as mere superstition, the ramblings of senile minds clinging to the shadows of a bygone era. But I persisted. I knew, deep within my heart, that there was a kernel of truth buried beneath layers of embellishment and exaggeration. The consistency of the stories across disparate regions, the recurring motifs and symbolic language, all hinted at a shared experience, a collective memory passed down through generations. These were not mere ghost stories told to frighten children. They were echoes of something real, something profound. My journey led me to a remote village nestled at the foot of Mount Haku, a sacred peak revered for its spiritual power. It was here, amongst the weathered wooden houses and the terraced rice paddies clinging precariously to the mountainside, that I finally found a clue, a tangible link to the legend I had been chasing for so long. An old woman, her face etched with the wisdom of 100 winters, spoke of a hidden path, a secret trail known only to a select few. A path that led to the valley of the whispering spirits. She spoke in hushed tones, her voice barely a whisper, her eyes darting nervously around, as if fearing unseen ears. She warned me of the dangers that lay ahead, of the trials that awaited anyone who dared to trespass upon the sacred ground. But her words, laced with fear and reverence, only served to strengthen my resolve. The path was treacherous, a narrow ribbon clinging to the sheer cliff face, barely wide enough for a single foot. The wind howled through the canyons, carrying with it the chilling whispers of the mountain spirits. The air grew thin and cold, the vegetation sparse and stunted. The world seemed to fade into a monochrome landscape of gray rock and swirling mist. As I climbed higher, the world below seemed to shrink and distort, becoming an alien landscape, divorced from the reality I knew. I felt a growing sense of unease, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, as if unseen eyes were watching my every move. But I pressed on, driven by an insatiable curiosity, a burning desire to witness the truth, to see with my own eyes what lay hidden in the heart of the mountain. I knew that I was venturing into the unknown, into a realm where the rules of the natural world no longer applied. But I was prepared to risk everything, to sacrifice my sanity, even my life, for the sake of knowledge. I was about to witness a secret, a ritual, a glimpse into the heart of a legend. I was about to see the ritual that gave the samurai immortality. I saw the ritual that gave samurai immortality, part 2 of 25. The parchment felt brittle, like dried leaves under my fingers, the ink a faded, rust-colored stain. I'd stolen it from the temple's archives, a place forbidden to outsiders like myself. The characters, spidery and alien, seemed to writhe on the page as I tried to decipher them by the flickering candlelight. The wind howled outside my small rented room, rattling the shoji screens, making the shadows dance and sway, mimicking the grotesque figures depicted in the scroll. The ritual, as far as I could understand, involved a specific type of katana, forged under a blood moon. It required the sacrifice of a willing participant, a warrior in his prime. But it wasn't simply killing. It was a meticulous dismantling, an offering of specific organs to specific deities, a grotesque symphony of blood and bone. The heart, lungs, and liver were burned as offerings to the fire kami. The eyes, presented to the moon, a plea for eternal sight. The final, chilling step involved consuming the warrior's still-beating heart by the one seeking immortality. A shiver ran down my spine. The very thought made my stomach churn. Was this the reason behind the legendary longevity of the samurai lords of old? Was this dark secret the source of their unwavering strength and ruthlessness? The more I read, the more I understood the intricate dance of life and death described in the scroll. It spoke of transferring the warrior's life force, his ki, into the recipient. It spoke of the blade absorbing the spilled blood, becoming a conduit for this transfer, a permanent link between the mortal and the immortal. I closed the scroll, the images seared into my mind. I had to see it. I had to know if this ancient, horrifying ritual was truth or legend. My obsession, sparked by whispers and rumors, had now grown into a consuming fire. The next few days were spent in a feverish haze. I researched the locations mentioned in the scroll, cross-referencing them with ancient maps and local folklore. It led me to a secluded valley, shrouded in mist and legend, deep in the heart of the mountains. Locals whispered of strange lights and unsettling chants emanating from the valley at night, warnings passed down through generations. They called it the Valley of Whispers, a place where the veil between worlds was thin. My journey there was fraught with peril. The mountain paths were treacherous, the weather unpredictable. I encountered strange, unsettling occurrences. Shadows that seemed to move independently, whispers carried on the wind that spoke my name. I began to doubt my sanity, questioning whether I was chasing a phantom, a delusion born from the cryptic text. Finally, after days of arduous travel, I reached the valley's edge. It was a desolate, eerily silent place. The air was heavy, charged with an unseen energy. A thick fog clung to the ground, obscuring everything beyond a few feet. The silence was broken only by the rustling of unseen creatures in the undergrowth and the distant, mournful cry of a bird. As dusk descended, I found a small cave overlooking the valley floor. It offered a vantage point, a place to observe without being seen. I huddled inside, clutching the stolen scroll, my heart pounding in my chest. As darkness enveloped the valley, a strange luminescence began to emanate from its depths. It grew steadily brighter, revealing a clearing in the center of the valley. A circle of stones, ancient and weathered, stood bathed in an unnatural, pulsating light. Figures began to emerge from the surrounding forest, their faces obscured by masks that resembled demonic visages. I held my breath, my eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. They moved with a chilling grace, their movements precise and ritualistic. In the center of the circle lay a figure bound to a stone altar. A young man, his face pale and etched with fear, but his eyes held a strange, unsettling calmness. He was dressed in the traditional garb of a samurai warrior. A figure emerged from the shadows, taller and more imposing than the others. He wore a mask of polished obsidian, reflecting the eerie light like two burning coals. He held a katana, its blade gleaming with a malevolent energy. The air crackled with anticipation. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that I was about to witness the ritual described in the stolen scroll. The obsidian-masked figure raised the katana, the blade catching the unnatural light, casting grotesque shadows that danced on the surrounding trees. The chanting intensified, a low, guttural drone that vibrated through the ground and into my bones. The young samurai on the altar closed his eyes, a serene expression on his face. The blade descended. The scream that tore from my throat was swallowed by the valley's oppressive silence. I squeezed my eyes shut, unable to bear witness to the unfolding horror. But the sounds, the wet, sickening sounds, they pierced through my closed lids, painting a vivid, gruesome picture in my mind. When I finally dared to open my eyes again, the deed was done. The obsidian-masked figure stood over the altar, the katana dripping with blood. He raised the still-beating heart to his lips. And then he turned. His obsidian mask seemed to lock onto my gaze across the valley. Even from that distance, I felt a jolt, a connection, as if he could see directly into my soul. And in that moment, I knew, he knew I had seen. The wind picked up, carrying with it the whispers from the valley, no longer just rumors, but promises. Promises of a long, dark hunt. To be continued. I saw the ritual that gave samurai immortality, Part 3. The rain intensified, mirroring the churning unease in my gut. The fisherman, Kenzo, hadn't spoken another word since his cryptic warning about the island. He steered the boat with a grim determination, his gaze fixed on the looming shadow that was Aoshima. The closer we got, the more palpable the silence became, broken only by the relentless drumming of the rain and the sloshing of waves against the hull. Even the gulls, usually so boisterous, were absent. As we neared the shore, the dense foliage parted to reveal a narrow, rocky inlet. Kenzo cut the engine, letting the boat drift towards a small, dilapidated wooden pier. The air grew thick with the smell of salt and something else, something acrid, metallic, almost coppery. It clung to the back of my throat, making me gag. "Stay close," Kenzo muttered, his voice barely above a whisper, his eyes darting nervously towards the island's interior. He tied the boat to a rotting post, the wood crumbling under the slightest pressure. We stepped onto the slick, moss-covered planks. The island felt wrong. The trees, gnarled and twisted, seemed to lean inwards, forming a claustrophobic canopy that blocked out most of the remaining light. The ground underfoot was soft and spongy, like walking on a giant, damp sponge. The path leading inland was barely discernible, a faint trail through the dense undergrowth. Kenzo led the way, his movements hesitant, almost as if he were afraid to disturb something. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the rustling of unseen things in the undergrowth and the constant drip, drip, drip of water from the leaves. After what felt like an eternity, we reached a clearing. In the center stood a stone structure, overgrown with vines and moss, barely recognizable as a building. It was small, perhaps no larger than a shed, but it radiated an unsettling aura, a palpable sense of age and malevolence. This is it," Kenzo whispered, his voice trembling. He pointed to a small, almost hidden entrance on the side of the structure, the sanctuary. Hesitantly, I followed him inside. The interior was pitch black, the air thick with the same coppery smell, now even stronger, making my stomach churn. Kenzo fumbled in his pocket and produced a small, battered lantern. As the flickering light illuminated the space, I gasped. The walls were covered in strange symbols, carved deep into the stone. They were unlike anything I had ever seen before, angular and sharp, almost alien. The floor was covered in a layer of dried something. It was dark and crusty, and the coppery smell seemed to emanate from it. I didn't want to know what it was. At the far end of the sanctuary was a raised platform, and on it lay a large, flat stone slab. It was stained dark, almost black in the center. Even in the dim light, I could see the faint outline of a human form etched into the stone. This is where it happened, Kenzo whispered, his voice barely audible above the pounding of my heart, where they performed the ritual. He pointed to a small, intricately carved bowl sitting near the edge of the platform. It was filled with a dark, viscous liquid. The coppery smell was overwhelming now, almost unbearable. "This," he began, his voice choked with fear, "this is the elixir." I stared at the bowl, a cold dread creeping into my bones. The elixir. The source of the samurai's immortality. I had read about it in ancient texts, dismissed it as myth and legend, but here it was, real and tangible, right in front of me. Suddenly, a faint sound reached my ears. A low, guttural chanting, coming from somewhere deep within the island. It grew louder, slowly, steadily, building to a crescendo that resonated within the very walls of the sanctuary. Kenzo's eyes widened in terror. He grabbed my arm, his grip like iron. "We have to leave, now!" He pulled me towards the entrance, but it was too late. The chanting intensified, and the ground began to tremble. The symbols on the walls seemed to glow with an eerie, internal light. The dark, viscous liquid in the bowl began to bubble and churn. Then, the stone slab in the center of the platform began to vibrate. The faint outline of the human form etched into the stone became clearer, sharper. And then, with a sickening crack, the slab split open. A figure rose from the fissure. It was tall and gaunt, its skin a sickly gray, its eyes glowing with an unnatural red light. It was clad in ancient samurai armor, the metal tarnished and corroded, yet somehow still radiating an aura of power and menace. The chanting stopped. The figure turned its glowing red eyes towards us, and in that moment, I knew that Kenzo's warnings had been true. I knew that I had seen something I was never meant to see. I had seen the ritual that gave samurai immortality, and now I would pay the price. I saw the ritual that gave samurai immortality, Part 4. The rain continued its relentless assault, a cold, insistent drumming on the corrugated iron roof of the shack. The fisherman, Kenzo, sat opposite me, his face etched with a weariness that seemed to go beyond mere physical exhaustion. He'd barely spoken since we'd left the cave, his eyes fixed on some distant point I couldn't see. The flickering lamp cast grotesque shadows that danced across his weathered features, accentuating the lines of worry and fear. "They'll know," he finally muttered, his voice a dry rasp. "They'll know we saw." "Who?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The events of the night were a horrific, surreal tapestry, woven with blood and ancient chants. I could still hear the rhythmic thumping of the taiko drums, feel the oppressive heat of the fire, see the glint of the blade, reflecting the crimson light. He didn't answer directly. "The ones who guard the secret," he said eventually, his gaze still distant. "The ones who serve the Kag." The word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken dread. Kaj, shadow. I'd heard whispers of it before, in hushed tones, late at night in smoky izakayas. Stories of shadowy figures, protectors of ancient, forbidden knowledge. Stories dismissed as folklore, drunken ramblings. But seeing what I'd seen in that cave, I couldn't dismiss them so easily. We sat in silence for a long time, the only sound the incessant drumming of the rain. Kenzo finally stirred, pulling a small, intricately carved wooden box from his pocket. He opened it with trembling hands, revealing a dried, blackened herb. He pinched off a piece and placed it on his tongue. "What is that?" I asked. "Shikisu," he replied, his voice barely audible. "Forget-me-not. Helps to blur the memories." He offered me the box. I hesitated. To forget what I'd witnessed, to erase the horror from my mind, a part of me screamed for that oblivion. But another part, a small, stubborn voice, insisted that I remember, that I bear witness. I shook my head. "I can't." Kenzo nodded slowly, as if he'd expected my answer. He closed the box and returned it to his pocket. "Then you must be careful," he said, his voice regaining a sliver of its former strength. "They will be watching. They will be listening." The fear coiled in my stomach, cold and tight. What do they want? "To protect the ritual," he said, his eyes narrowing, "to ensure its secrecy. And they will do anything to achieve that." He rose to his feet, his movements stiff and slow. He walked to the single, grimy window and peered out into the storm-lashed night. "I have to go," he said, turning back to me. His face was a mask of grim determination. "I need to warn the others." "Warn who?" I asked. He didn't answer, just shook his head. He opened the door, the wind and rain immediately gusting into the shack. "Stay here," he said, his voice barely audible above the storm. "Don't leave, and don't trust anyone." He stepped out into the darkness, and the door slammed shut behind him, leaving me alone in the flickering lamplight. The hours that followed were a blur of fear and paranoia. Every creak of the shack, every rustle of leaves outside the window sent my heart racing. I huddled in the corner, clutching my knees to my chest, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. The ritual, the chanting, the blood, it played over and over in my mind, a gruesome, unending loop. The rain finally stopped just before dawn, leaving a heavy, oppressive silence in its wake. I crept to the window and cautiously peered out. The sky was a bruised purple, the first hint of sunlight just beginning to break through the clouds. The fishing village was eerily quiet, deserted. Smoke curled lazily from a few chimneys, but there was no sign of life, no sound of human activity. A sudden, chilling thought struck me. Kenzo had said he needed to warn the others, but what if he'd been too late? What if they'd already been silenced? The fear, which had been a dull ache in my gut, now surged through me, a tidal wave of panic. I had to get out of there. I had to leave the island. I grabbed my bag, my hands shaking so badly I could barely zip it closed. I slipped out of the shack and into the pre-dawn stillness. The air was thick with the smell of salt and seaweed and a new, unsettling scent, a faint metallic tang that clung to the back of my throat, the smell of blood. As I made my way towards the harbor, the rising sun cast long, eerie shadows across the deserted streets. I kept my head down, my eyes darting nervously from side to side. I felt like I was being watched, that unseen eyes were following my every move. And then I saw them. Standing at the edge of the harbor, silhouetted against the rising sun, were three figures. They were tall and imposing, dressed in dark, flowing robes. Their faces were obscured by deep hoods, but I could feel their gaze upon me, cold and piercing. They didn't move, didn't speak. They just stood there, watching me, waiting, and in that moment I knew Kenzo hadn't been warning the others, he'd been warning me. The keg had found me. I saw the ritual that gave samurai immortality, Part 5. The emaciated man, or rather what was left of him, remained slumped against the obsidian altar, the air, thick with the metallic tang of blood and something else, something acrid and ancient, made my lungs burn. My stomach lurched, but I forced myself to stay. I had to see. I had to understand. This ritual, whispered, in hushed tones, in dusty libraries and hidden scrolls. The very ritual that granted the legendary samurai their unnatural longevity, unfolded before my very eyes. The chanting intensified. The robed figures moved with a sickeningly precise rhythm, their movements mirroring each other, creating a dizzying kaleidoscope of shadows against the flickering torchlight. A low hum permeated the air, vibrating through my very bones, resonating with the chanting in a way that felt profoundly unsettling. The obsidian altar, polished smooth as glass, began to glow faintly, emanating a cold, otherworldly light that pulsed in time with the humming. Then, something shifted. The humming intensified, becoming a high-pitched whine that grated against my nerves. The torches sputtered, casting elongated, dancing shadows that writhed like tormented spirits. The robed figures raised their arms in unison, and the emaciated man on the altar moved. He twitched, his skeletal fingers curling inwards, his head lolling back to reveal a face devoid of any trace of life. Yet he moved. His chest, caved in and seemingly devoid of lungs, began to rise and fall in a shallow, ragged breath. The robed figures lowered their arms and began a new chant, this one lower, guttural, almost animalistic. The obsidian altar pulsed with light, bathing the chamber in an unnerving, ethereal glow. And then I saw it. Tendrils, thin as hair and shimmering with the same otherworldly light as the altar, snaked out from the obsidian surface, reaching towards the emaciated man. They coiled around his limbs, his torso, his neck, burrowing into his flesh with sickening ease. The man convulsed, his body arching backwards in a grotesque parody of life. The air grew colder, the humming louder. The tendrils pulsed, their light growing brighter, and I felt an icy dread crawl up my spine, a primal fear that whispered of ancient, unknowable things. The chanting reached a fever pitch, and the robed figures began to sway, their bodies moving in a frenzied, almost ecstatic dance. Suddenly, the humming ceased. The robed figures froze, their arms still outstretched, their faces hidden beneath their hoods. A silence, thick and heavy, descended upon the chamber, broken only by the crackling of the torches. The tendrils, now a network of pulsating light woven into the man's flesh, slowly receded back into the obsidian altar. The light faded, the altar returning to its previous dull sheen. The emaciated man, now lying still, looked different. His skin, previously stretched taut over bone, now had a faint, almost imperceptible sheen. His chest rose and fell with a steady rhythm. He looked alive. The robed figures lowered their arms and turned, as if in unison, towards the concealed entrance where I stood hidden. I froze, my heart pounding against my ribs, my breath caught in my throat. They couldn't see me, could they? The shadows were deep, and I had been so careful. One of the figures, the tallest, stepped forward. The others parted for him, bowing their heads in deference. He raised a hand, a slow, deliberate movement, and pointed directly at my hiding place. My blood ran cold. He knew I was there. He began to walk towards me, his footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence. The others followed, their movements as synchronized and unsettling as before. I pressed myself further back into the shadows, praying they were mistaken, praying this was just a terrible, nightmarish coincidence. But the tall figure continued to advance, his pace measured and unwavering. He stopped just short of the entrance, his form a dark silhouette against the faint glow of the altar. I could feel his gaze, even through the concealing darkness, burning into me. Then he spoke. His voice, deep and resonant, echoed through the chamber, each word dripping with an ancient, chilling power. "You have seen," he said, the words hanging in the air like a curse. "Now you belong to us." The other figures stepped forward, blocking the entrance, their shadows looming over me like predators closing in on their prey. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that there was nowhere to run. I had witnessed the ritual, the terrible secret of the samurai's immortality, and now I would pay the price. My mind raced, frantically searching for a way out, but the robed figures were closing in, their movements deliberate, their purpose clear. I was trapped. Then, a flicker of movement caught my eye. From the shadows behind the altar, a small, almost imperceptible figure emerged. It was a child, no older than 10, dressed in the same dark robes as the others. He moved with a hesitant grace, his head bowed low, as if afraid to meet the gaze of the taller figures. He held something in his hands, something small and wrapped in cloth. He approached the tall figure and offered him the wrapped object. The tall figure took it, his movements still unnervingly slow and deliberate. He unwrapped the cloth, revealing a small, obsidian knife, identical to the one used in the ritual. He turned, the knife glinting in the torchlight, and looked directly at me. "The ritual," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion, "must be completed." I saw the ritual that gave samurai immortality, Part 6. The flickering candlelight cast long, dancing shadows across the dusty tatami mats. The silence in the abandoned dojo was thick, broken only by the incessant drumming of rain against the paper windows. I clutched the tattered scroll tighter, its faded kanji seeming to burn into my skin. Within its folds, I believed, lay the key to understanding and perhaps stopping the horrifying ritual I had witnessed. 3 nights had passed since I had fled the mountain temple. 3 nights of fragmented sleep, plagued by visions of crimson-soaked blades and the chilling, inhuman shriek that accompanied the final plunge. The old woman's words echoed in my mind. They seek the path of the Oni, immortality through pain, through sacrifice. I had found refuge in this forgotten dojo, hidden amidst the sprawling, impersonal city. It offered a semblance of peace, a place to unravel the secrets contained within the scroll. The kanji was archaic, a dialect rarely used even in ancient texts. I recognized certain symbols related to swordsmanship, others hinting at Shinto rituals, but the majority remained stubbornly cryptic. My progress was agonizingly slow. Each deciphered character felt like a step deeper into a dark labyrinth, the walls closing in around me. The air grew heavy, the silence oppressive. I started seeing movement in the periphery, shadows shifting just beyond the candlelight's reach. My nerves, already frayed, stretched taut as a bowstring. I forced myself to focus, tracing the complex strokes with my finger. A recurring phrase began to emerge, the steel chrysanthemum. It appeared again and again, intertwined with symbols of blood and bone. The image conjured was unsettling, a flower forged of metal, blooming with the crimson stain of life. A floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around, heart pounding against my ribs. Nothing, just shadows and the relentless rain. I told myself it was the wind, the age of the building, the product of an overactive imagination fueled by fear and exhaustion. But the unease remained. I returned to the scroll, the chilling phrase, the steel chrysanthemum, resonating in my mind. Below it, I finally deciphered a passage that sent a shiver down my spine. The vessel must be emptied to receive the Oni's gift. The spirit, broken and reforged in the crucible of agony. It was a description of the ritual, the samurai, the vessel, the Oni, the source of their unnatural longevity. And the price, a complete annihilation of the self, replaced by something else. A low, guttural growl vibrated through the floor. This time it wasn't my imagination. The candles flickered violently, threatening to extinguish themselves. A stench of decay and iron filled the air. Terror gripped me, paralyzing me in place. Slowly, a figure emerged from the shadows, tall and imposing, clad in dark, tattered robes. Its face was hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat, but I could see the glint of something metallic in its hand, a katana, its blade long and wickedly curved. I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. The figure took a step closer, the floorboards groaning under its weight. The air grew colder, the silence punctuated by the rhythmic drip, drip, drip of rainwater leaking through the roof. The figure stopped a few feet away, the brim of its hat tilted slightly upwards, revealing a glimpse of what lay beneath. It wasn't a face, not in any human sense. It was a mask, forged of blackened steel, shaped like a grotesque, snarling demon. The steel chrysanthemum, the symbol I had been deciphering, now staring back at me with empty, malevolent eyes. The katana raised slowly, the steel catching the candlelight. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was one of them. One of the immortals. One of the Oni's chosen. The demon mask tilted further, revealing a sliver of what lay beneath. It was a flash of something pale, something familiar. A memory flickered in my mind. A face seen only briefly in the flickering torchlight of the mountain temple. The face of the young samurai, the one who had undergone the ritual. My blood ran cold. The ritual hadn't just transformed them physically. It had stolen their identities, leaving behind only hollow shells inhabited by something ancient and monstrous. The katana descended. I closed my eyes, bracing for the inevitable. but the blow never came. Instead, a voice, raspy and distorted, whispered in my ear, "You have seen too much." The voice was familiar, chillingly so. It was the voice of the young samurai, the voice of the man who was no longer a man. To be continued. I saw the ritual that gave samurai immortality. Part 7. The chanting grew louder, a guttural resonance that vibrated through the very foundations of the temple. The air thrummed, thick with anticipation. My breath caught in my throat, each inhale tasting of incense and something else, something metallic and acrid, like old blood. The priestess, eyes still vacant, began to sway, her movements mirroring the rhythm of the chant, becoming increasingly frenzied. The samurai, impassive as ever, remained kneeling, his back ramrod straight, an island of stillness in the swirling chaos. I glanced at Kenji. His face was pale, drawn tight with fear. He gripped my arm, his fingers digging in. He didn't speak, but his eyes pleaded with me to do something, anything, to stop this. But what could I do? We were trapped, invisible observers to a ceremony that felt both ancient and terrifyingly current. The priestess's movements became more violent, her limbs jerking and twisting at unnatural angles. The chanting intensified, a cacophony of voices that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The flickering lamplight cast grotesque shadows that danced on the walls, twisting familiar shapes into monstrous apparitions. I squeezed my eyes shut for a moment, trying to block out the sights and sounds, but the chanting only grew louder, penetrating my eyelids, burrowing deep into my skull. When I opened my eyes again, the priestess was holding a knife. It was long and thin, the blade gleaming obscenely in the lamplight. My stomach lurched. I knew, with a sickening certainty, what was about to happen. She approached the kneeling samurai, the knife held aloft. He didn't flinch, didn't even seem to breathe. The chanting reached a fever pitch. The priestess raised the knife higher, the tip hovering just above the samurai's exposed neck. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. I could hear the blood pounding in my ears, a frantic drumbeat against the relentless chanting. Then, with a swift, brutal motion, she brought the knife down. Not on the samurai's neck, but on her own arm. A gasp escaped my lips. Kenji whimpered beside me. The priestess didn't even cry out. Her face remained blank, almost serene. Blood, thick and dark, welled up from the deep gash in her arm, flowing down over her hand, dripping onto the tatami mats. The chanting stopped abruptly, replaced by an eerie silence. The priestess held her bleeding arm over the samurai's head. Blood dripped onto his shaved scalp, tracing a crimson path down his forehead, over his closed eyelids. He remained perfectly still, a statue bathed in blood. The silence stretched on, unbearable in its intensity. I felt a strange pressure in the air, a tingling sensation that prickled my skin. The lamplight flickered violently, casting wild, distorted shadows that seemed to writhe and pulse on the walls. The air grew thick with the metallic scent of blood, overpowering the incense. Then, slowly, the samurai's eyes opened. They were no longer the warm brown I had seen earlier. They were a cold, flat black, devoid of any emotion, any humanity. They seemed to absorb the light, leaving only emptiness. He looked directly at where we were hidden, his gaze unwavering, penetrating. I felt a jolt of pure terror, a primal fear that gripped me to the core. He couldn't see us, could he? We were invisible. We had to be. But his eyes, those empty black eyes, seemed to bore into me, stripping away my layers of protection, exposing my very soul. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything to escape that chilling gaze, but I was paralyzed, frozen in place, by a fear so profound it bordered on awe. He blinked, and the moment was broken. He looked away, his gaze sweeping across the room as if searching for something. The priestess, still holding her bleeding arm, swayed slightly, her face pale and drawn. The chanting began again, this time slower, more measured, almost hypnotic. The priestess, guided by the chanting, began to smear the blood on the samurai's face, drawing strange symbols on his forehead and cheeks. The symbols seemed to writhe and shift as she drew them, as if alive. I watched, mesmerized and horrified, as the ritual continued, the air thick with unspoken power, the silence broken only by the low, rhythmic chanting. The samurai remained impassive, his black eyes fixed on some distant point, his face a mask of blood. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that I was witnessing something truly ancient, something powerful, something unholy. And I knew with equal certainty that I would never be the same. The chanting reached a crescendo, and the priestess collapsed, her body falling limply to the tatami mats. The samurai remained standing, his face smeared with blood, his black eyes gleaming in the lamplight. He took a slow, deliberate breath, the first I had seen him take since the ritual began. Then he turned, and his gaze locked onto ours once more. He smiled. To be continued. I saw the ritual that gave samurai immortality, Part 8. The air in the abandoned shrine felt thick, viscous, like breathing through wet cotton. The scent of decay and something indefinably metallic clung to the back of my throat. I'd spent the last week poring over the fragmented scrolls, their archaic kanji twisting into nightmarish illustrations of the ritual. Each new detail I unearthed, each whispered secret decoded, only deepened the chilling dread that had taken root in my soul. The ritual, it turned out, wasn't about achieving immortality in the traditional sense. It wasn't about living forever in the same body. It was something far more grotesque, a twisted parody of life everlasting. The samurai, through a series of horrifying acts, consuming the still-beating heart of a sacred white stag, bathing in a concoction of rare herbs and human blood, chanting incantations that seemed to warp the very fabric of reality, didn't achieve immortality. They achieved transference. Their consciousness, their essence, their very being was moved from their mortal shell into a specially crafted katana. The blade became their vessel, their prison, their eternity. Trapped within the cold steel, they existed as a silent, watchful presence, experiencing the world through the actions of whoever wielded them. I now understood the unsettling intensity in the eyes of the old man. He wasn't just a collector. He was an asterisk host. The katana's previous owner, its trapped samurai soul, was looking out at me, through him. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. I glanced at the katana resting on its stand, its polished surface gleaming dully in the dim light filtering through the cracked shoji screens. I could almost sense a faint pulsation emanating from it, a subtle thrumming that mirrored the erratic beat of my own fear-stricken heart. The scrolls detailed a way to sever the connection, to release the trapped samurai. It involved a complex ritual performed under the next blood moon, using the very same ingredients used to bind them. But the warnings in the scrolls, scribbled in frantic, almost illegible kanji, were stark. The release, if performed incorrectly, could have catastrophic consequences. The samurai's essence, untethered and enraged, could be unleashed upon the world, a vengeful spirit capable of unimaginable destruction. Was I willing to risk it? To potentially unleash a centuries-old, bloodthirsty entity upon an unsuspecting world? The old man's warning echoed in my mind. Some doors are best left unopened. But the thought of him, of countless others throughout history, serving as living vessels for these trapped souls, was unbearable. I had to try. I had to find a way to break this horrifying cycle. The next blood moon was just 3 nights away. I spent the intervening days gathering the necessary ingredients, each acquisition a descent further into the macabre. The white stag, thankfully, was no longer required. Its essence, according to the scrolls, was symbolically replaced by a rare white orchid found only on the slopes of Mount Fuji. The journey to retrieve it was treacherous, the mountain's jagged paths shrouded in mist and an unnerving silence. The other ingredients were harder to come by, pushing me to the fringes of society, into dimly lit apothecaries and shadowy back alleys where whispers of forbidden knowledge and ancient practices still lingered. I procured vials of strange viscous fluids, powders ground from unidentified bones, and bundles of dried herbs that smelled of both life and death. As the blood moon rose on the appointed night, casting an eerie crimson glow over the abandoned shrine, I arranged the ingredients around the katana's stand. My hands trembled as I lit the black candles salvaged from a forgotten temple, their flames flickering like restless spirits. I chanted the words from the scrolls, my voice a shaky whisper in the oppressive silence. The air crackled with an unseen energy, and the katana on its stand began to vibrate, its humming intensifying into a low, resonant drone. Suddenly, the old man's face flashed before my eyes, his gaze intense, pleading. I hesitated, my resolve faltering. Was I doing the right thing? Was I about to unleash something far worse than what I was trying to contain? But it was too late. The ritual had begun. The air shimmered. The shadows in the corners of the shrine seemed to deepen, and the kanji characters on the scrolls began to glow with an unholy light. A voice, cold and ancient, whispered from the blade. It spoke in a language I didn't understand, yet somehow I knew what it was saying. It was a curse, a promise of vengeance. The katana vibrated violently. Then, with a sharp crack, the blade snapped in two. A wave of icy air swept through the shrine, extinguishing the candles and plunging me into darkness. I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest, the chilling whisper of the samurai echoing in my ears. I had broken the blade, but I hadn't freed the spirit within. I had just shattered its prison, unleashing it upon the world. And now it was hunting me. I saw the ritual that gave samurai immortality, Part 9. The old woman, her face like a crumpled paper lantern, watched me with unnervingly bright eyes. Her silence was a thick, suffocating blanket. The flickering candlelight cast long, dancing shadows across the walls of the tea-house, turning mundane objects into monstrous shapes. My tea remained untouched, the delicate floral scent now tainted by the weight of what she had revealed, the grotesque truth behind the samurai's unnatural longevity. "You saw it," she finally rasped, her voice like dry leaves skittering across cobblestones. "The transfer." I swallowed hard, the knot of dread in my stomach tightening. The boy, he was. "A vessel," she finished, her gaze boring into mine. A fresh, young spirit to house the aging samurai's essence, a cruel but effective method. My mind reeled. The boy's vacant stare, the unnatural stillness of his body as the samurai approached, it all made sickening sense now. This wasn't immortality, it was parasitic possession, a grotesque cycle of life and death, youth and decay. Why are you telling me this?" I whispered, my voice barely audible above the crackling of the fire in the hearth. The old woman's lips curled into a thin, unsettling smile. "Because you saw, and those who see, well, they become part of the story." A chill ran down my spine, colder than the mountain air. "Part of the story? What do you mean?" She leaned closer, her breath hot and stale against my ear. "The samurai? They know you saw. They can feel it, like a tremor in the earth. They'll be coming for you." Panic seized me. I wanted to run, to flee back down the mountain, but my limbs felt heavy, rooted to the spot. "What can I do?" I pleaded, my voice trembling. "Hide," she whispered, her eyes gleaming. "Hide, and pray they don't find you." She reached into the folds of her kimono and produced a small, intricately carved wooden charm. It depicted a three-legged crow, its eyes inlaid with tiny obsidian beads. "Take this," she said, pressing it into my hand. "It may offer some protection, but be warned, it will only slow them down. It won't stop them." I clutched the charm tightly, the smooth wood a small comfort in the face of the overwhelming terror. I wanted to ask more, to understand how I could possibly escape the samurai's reach, but the old woman abruptly stood, her movements surprisingly agile for her age. "Go now," she said, her voice regaining its sharp edge, "and don't trust anyone, especially those who seem unchanged." I stumbled out of the tea house into the biting night air. The moon, a sliver in the inky sky, offered little illumination. The mountain loomed over me, a dark and menacing presence. The wind howled through the trees, whispering secrets I didn't want to hear. I ran. I ran blindly through the darkness, the fear fueling my every step. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to get away, as far away as possible. The old woman's words echoed in my mind, a constant reminder of the danger lurking just behind me. The forest floor was uneven, littered with fallen branches and loose rocks. I tripped and stumbled, my breath catching in my throat with every near fall. The trees seemed to close in around me, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs ached. I ran until I collapsed, breathless and exhausted, at the base of a towering cedar tree. I huddled against the rough bark, clutching the wooden charm, my heart pounding in my chest. The silence of the mountain was unnerving, broken only by the rustling of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. Every sound, every shadow seemed to hold a hidden menace. I closed my eyes, trying to calm my racing heart, but the image of the ritual, of the boy's vacant eyes and the samurai's chilling smile, kept flashing through my mind. How long I stayed there, huddled in the darkness, I don't know. Time seemed to lose all meaning. The cold seeped into my bones, and the fear gnawed at my insides. Then I heard it. A faint sound, carried on the wind, a soft, rhythmic clicking, like the sound of metal against stone. My eyes snapped open. The clicking grew louder, closer. I held my breath, straining to see through the darkness, and then I saw them. Two figures, silhouetted against the moonlit sky, tall and imposing, their forms unmistakable. The samurai. They were coming for me. I saw the ritual that gave samurai immortality, Part 10. The silence stretched, heavy and thick, punctuated only by the rhythmic dripping from some unseen source deep within the mountain. Kenji's words, the confession of his centuries-long existence, hung in the air like a noxious gas. My mind, already reeling from the grotesque tapestry woven from whispers and half-glimpsed horrors, struggled to reconcile this impossible truth. Immortality. Achieved through an unspeakable ritual. How? I finally croaked, the word a dry rasp in my throat. How is it possible? Kenji's gaze remained fixed on the darkness beyond the flickering lantern light. The scrolls, they spoke of a pact, a transaction with something other. He shuddered, a tremor running through his aged frame. A being residing in the heart of this mountain, a collector of souls. My stomach churned. A collector of souls? I repeated, the phrase tasting like ash in my mouth. You mean sacrifices? He nodded slowly, the lantern light catching the stark white of his hair. Not just any souls. Souls imbued with a specific resonance. Warriors. Those who have mastered the art of killing. Those whose spirits burn with the fire of battle. And the children? I stammered, the image of the pale, vacant-faced children in the procession flashing through my mind. Kenji closed his eyes, as if the memory was a physical blow. They are the vessels. Empty shells prepared to receive the transferred essence of the warrior. A fresh start, a new body, untainted by the ravages of time. He opened his eyes again, and the emptiness within them chilled me to the bone. The ritual, it's a grotesque parody of birth. The warrior's spirit is extracted, refined, and forced into the child. The child's own essence, it's extinguished. He fell silent again, and the dripping in the darkness seemed to grow louder, each drop a hammer blow against the silence. The air grew heavy, oppressive. I felt a growing unease, a primal fear stirring within me. It wasn't just Kenji's words, it was something else, something in the air, in the very stone around us. A palpable sense of watching. We need to leave, I said, my voice strained. The idea of remaining in that place, even for a moment longer, filled me with a visceral dread. Kenji shook his head, his face a mask of despair. "We can't. Not yet. There's something I need to do." "What?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. He looked at me, a strange glint in his eye. "I need to stop the ritual." My breath caught in my throat. "Stop it? How? You said it's been going on for centuries." "This time is different," he said, his voice low and urgent. "This time, the warrior they've chosen, it's—" He hesitated, his gaze drifting to the darkness. "It's who?" I pressed. He took a deep breath, his shoulders slumping. "It's my grandson." The words hung in the air, heavy with a grief that transcended time. Suddenly, the fragments of Kenji's story began to coalesce into a horrifying picture. His obsession with the mountain, his secretive trips, his cryptic warnings. It all made terrible sense now. He wasn't just studying the ritual. He was trying to prevent it. Trying to save his own descendant from becoming a vessel for a soul-stealing abomination. He doesn't know. Kenji whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "They took him. Said he was chosen. Blessed." He clenched his fists, his knuckles white. "They lied." I looked at him, at the ancient warrior trapped in a decaying body, his spirit broken by centuries of witnessing unspeakable horrors. He had seen too much, carried the weight of too many secrets. And now he was facing the ultimate test, confronting the darkness that had haunted him for centuries, not for himself, but for the last vestige of his family. The silence returned, deeper and more oppressive than before. The dripping continued, each drop a chilling reminder of the passage of time, of the relentless march of the ritual. And in the depths of that silence, I heard something else. A faint, rhythmic chanting, growing steadily louder. It was coming from deeper within the mountain, echoing through the twisting passages. The sound of the ritual beginning. Kenji stood up, his eyes burning with a newfound resolve. He looked at me, his gaze steady. "Come," he said, his voice low but firm. "We have to hurry." He turned and started walking deeper into the darkness, towards the chanting, towards the heart of the mountain, towards the ritual. And with a growing sense of dread, I followed. The air grew colder, the darkness deeper. The chanting intensified, a morbid lullaby beckoning us towards an unimaginable horror. And I knew with a chilling certainty that what we were about to witness would change us forever. I saw the ritual that gave samurai immortality, Part 11. The air in the archive grew colder, a damp chill seeping from the stones despite the summer heat outside. The scroll, now unfurled across the table, depicted the ritual in horrifying detail. Not just the bloodletting, the chants, the moonlit dance, but the asterisk transformation. The artist had captured the subtle shift, the hardening of the eyes, the almost imperceptible lengthening of the limbs, the way the skin seemed to shimmer, momentarily, like polished obsidian. Kenzo, his face ashen, traced the image of the obsidian blade with a trembling finger. "The black katana," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "It is said it was forged in the heart of a dying star, quenched in the blood of 1,000 Oni." I shivered. Oni, demons, folk tales. But after witnessing the ritual, the line between myth and reality had blurred beyond recognition. I felt a creeping dread, a certainty that the things whispered in hushed tones around village fires were more than just stories. The inscription, I pointed to the archaic kanji bordering the illustration. "Can you translate it?" Kenzo leaned closer, his breath catching in his throat. He muttered the words under his breath, translating haltingly. The flesh is weak, the spirit enduring, the blood, the key, the moon, the witness, the blade, the vessel." He trailed off, his eyes wide with a dawning horror. "The vessel," I repeated, my stomach churning. "The katana, it's not just a weapon. It's a conduit." Kenzo nodded, his face pale and drawn. "For the essence," he finished, the words barely audible, "the essence of what is taken." the life force. The implications slammed into me like a physical blow. The samurai weren't just achieving immortality, they were stealing it. Draining the life from another being, channeling it through the black katana, and embedding it into their own souls. This wasn't a ritual of ascension. It was a parasitic act of horrifying, calculated theft. A cold wave washed over me, and I suddenly understood the true horror of the ritual. It wasn't the grotesque spectacle, the blood, or even the demonic imagery. It was the cold, calculated depravity of it, the utter disregard for human life. "There's more," Kenzo whispered, pointing to a smaller, almost hidden panel at the bottom of the scroll. It depicted a figure shrouded in shadow, holding the black katana aloft. But the figure, it wasn't human. Its form was distorted, elongated, almost skeletal. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural light. What is that?" I asked, my voice trembling. Kenzo's voice was barely a whisper. The consequence. The final stage. The scroll warns of what becomes of those who partake in the ritual for too long. They become something else entirely, no longer human. We stared at the grotesque image in silence, the weight of the revelation pressing down on us. The immortality granted by the ritual was a poisoned chalice, a slow descent into something monstrous. Suddenly, a faint scratching sound echoed through the archive. I froze, every muscle tense. The sound seemed to be coming from the back of the room, from behind the heavy oak shelves that lined the far wall. "What was that?" I whispered, my heart pounding in my chest. Kenzo, his eyes wide with terror, slowly shook his head. I don't know." The scratching came again, louder this time, accompanied by a low, guttural growl. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. Something was back there, something unnatural. We exchanged a terrified look. The atmosphere in the room crackled with fear. The scrolls around us seemed to rustle, as if stirred by an unseen presence. Kenzo reached for the katana he had brought with him, his hand trembling. He unsheathed it slowly, the blade gleaming faintly in the dim light. The scratching stopped. The silence that followed was even more terrifying. We held our breath, listening intently. The air felt heavy, charged with an unseen energy. Then, a slow, deliberate thud echoed from behind the shelves. Another followed. And another. Something was moving towards us, its footsteps heavy and measured. Kenzo gripped his katana tightly, his knuckles white. I could see the fear etched on his face, the dawning realization that whatever was behind those shelves, it was not human. The shelves began to shake. Books tumbled to the floor. The dust swirled around us, obscuring our vision. Then, with a deafening crash, the shelves splintered and collapsed. And from the darkness beyond, a figure emerged. It was tall and gaunt, its limbs impossibly long and thin. Its skin was pale and stretched tight across its bones, giving it a skeletal appearance. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural, malevolent light. And in its hand, it held a katana as black as night. The black katana. I saw the ritual that gave samurai immortality, Part 12. The air in the antique shop hung thick and still, smelling of dust and something faintly metallic, like old blood. I stared at the tsuba, the handguard of the katana, now cleaned of the grime that had obscured the intricate carving. It was a depiction of the ritual, more detailed than any I'd seen before. The kneeling samurai, the shrouded figures, the obsidian blade glinting under a distorted moon. Holding it felt wrong, a transgression. My hand trembled. Old Man Ito watched me, his face an inscrutable mask. "You recognize it, don't you?" he finally said, his voice a dry rustle. I nodded, unable to speak. The nightmares had intensified since I'd started researching the ritual. Swirling visions of shadowy figures and the chilling whispers of ancient words I couldn't understand, yet somehow knew. Now, holding a piece of the ritual in my hand, they threatened to spill into reality. "The tsuba, it was a gift," Ito continued, his eyes distant. "Given to those who witnessed the ritual, a memento." He chuckled, a dry, rasping sound that sent shivers down my spine. a reminder of what they had seen, of what they could never speak of. "But why give a memento?" I managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. "Wouldn't secrecy be paramount?" Ito's smile widened, revealing teeth stained a disturbing yellow. "Secrecy, yes, but also control. A reminder of the consequences of betrayal." My stomach churned. The ritual, the immortality, the terrifying cost. It was all starting to piece together in a way that chilled me to the bone. This wasn't just a legend, a folktale whispered around campfires. It was real, and it was far more sinister than I could have imagined. "There were others," Ito said, breaking the silence. "Others who witnessed the ritual received the tsuba. They're still out there." The thought sent a jolt of fear through me. Immortal samurai, bound by a terrible secret, walking among us. How many? And what were they doing, living in the shadows of history? "I need to know more," I said, my voice trembling. "Where did you get this? Who gave it to you?" Ito shook his head, his smile fading. "Some things are best left buried," he said, his voice low and warning. This is one of them." He reached out a gnarled hand for the tsuba. I hesitated, a strange reluctance gripping me. It felt like I was holding a key to unlocking a truth I wasn't sure I was ready to face. "Please," Ito said, his voice laced with a sudden urgency. "Give it to me." "It's dangerous." I looked at the tsuba, at the intricate carving depicting the ritual. A strange compulsion, a dark fascination, warred with the growing fear in my gut. I knew I should give it back, that I should walk away and never look back. But something held me captive, a morbid curiosity that whispered promises of forbidden knowledge. Finally, I relinquished the tsuba. As Ito took it, his fingers brushed against mine, and a jolt like static electricity passed between us. I recoiled, pulling my hand back as if burned. Ito chuckled again, his eyes glittering. "Curious, aren't you?" he said. "Too curious for your own good." He carefully wrapped the tsuba in a silk cloth and placed it back in the display case, locking it securely. The moment it was out of sight, the oppressive atmosphere in the shop seemed to lighten, the metallic scent fading. "I think you should leave now," Ito said, his voice returning to its usual calm tone. "Forget about the ritual. Forget about the samurai. Forget about everything you've learned." I nodded dumbly, backing away towards the door. My mind raced, a chaotic jumble of questions and fears. Who was Ito? How much did he know? And what were the consequences of my curiosity? As I reached the door, Ito spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "They are watching you," he said. "They know you're looking. Be careful." I stumbled out of the shop and into the bustling street, the sunlight blinding after the dim interior. The city noise, usually a comforting hum, now felt jarring, a cacophony that grated on my nerves. I felt exposed, vulnerable, as if unseen eyes were following my every move. Ito's words echoed in my mind. "They are watching you." Who were they? The immortal samurai? Or something else, something even more sinister, lurking in the shadows of the ritual? I knew I should heed Ito's warning, that I should forget everything and try to return to my normal life. But the seed of curiosity had been planted, and it was already taking root, growing into a dark obsession that I knew would be impossible to ignore. I had seen the tsuba, I had touched a piece of the ritual, and now I was caught in its web. I had to know the truth, no matter the cost. As I walked away, I glanced back at the antique shop, a shiver running down my spine. The curtains were drawn, obscuring the interior from view, but I could feel it, a lingering presence, a silent warning that I was already in too deep. The ritual had found me, and there was no turning back. I saw the ritual that gave samurai immortality, Part 13. The air hung thick and heavy, saturated with the coppery tang of blood, and something far more ancient, something that prickled at the back of my throat like incense burned over the bones of the forgotten. The cave, once a place of hushed reverence, was now a charnel house, the smooth stone slick with gore. The flickering torchlight cast long, dancing shadows that seemed to mock the carnage, transforming the grotesque shapes into even more horrific phantasms. Masa was gone. The platform where he'd stood, moments before surrendering himself to the ritual, was empty. The obsidian blade lay discarded, its polished surface reflecting the flickering flames like 1,000 malevolent eyes. My gaze drifted to the now still surface of the pool. The water, previously churning with an unnatural energy, was calm, almost eerily so. A thin film, iridescent and oily, coated its surface, pulsing faintly in the torchlight. I couldn't bring myself to approach it. The memory of Masao's descent, his screams cut short by the chilling silence that followed, was seared into my mind. I felt a primal fear, a deep-seated instinct screaming at me to flee, to put as much distance as possible between myself and this cursed place. But my feet remained rooted to the spot, held captive by a morbid fascination. The silence stretched, broken only by the drip, drip, drip of water from the cave ceiling. Each drop seemed to amplify the stillness, the emptiness, the chilling realization that I was utterly alone. I strained my ears, listening for any sign, any indication of what had become of Masao. Nothing. Then, a ripple disturbed the surface of the pool. Small, at first it quickly spread outwards, growing larger, more forceful. My breath hitched in my throat, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. The iridescent film parted, revealing the inky blackness beneath. Something was rising. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, a figure emerged from the depths. It was humanoid in shape, but different. Taller, broader, its skin glistening with the same oily substance that coated the water's surface. The flickering torchlight danced across its features, making it difficult to discern details, but I could make out the hard angles of its face, the sharp, predatory lines of its jaw. It was Masao, but twisted, transformed into something other. He stood on the edge of the pool, water streaming from his naked form, and looked directly at me. His eyes, once warm and full of life, were now cold, hard, and utterly devoid of emotion. They burned with an unnatural light, a cold, internal fire that seemed to bore into my soul. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything but stand there and face this thing that had once been my friend. But I was paralyzed, frozen in place by a terror so profound it robbed me of all volition. He took a step towards me, then another. With each step, the air grew heavier, the silence more oppressive. The faint scent of blood was now overpowering, mingled with the same unsettlingly ancient odor I had noticed earlier. "Masao?" I croaked, my voice barely a whisper. He stopped, tilting his head slightly, as if considering my words. Then, a low growl rumbled deep within his chest, a sound that vibrated through the very stone of the cave. It wasn't human. He opened his mouth, and a voice, deep and resonant, filled the cavern. It wasn't Masao's voice. It was something older, something colder, something inhuman. "Masao is gone," the voice echoed, each syllable dripping with a chilling finality. "He is reborn." He took another step, and I flinched, shrinking back against the cave wall. He paused, his cold eyes fixed on me, studying me with an unnerving intensity. He raised a hand, its fingers long and slender, tipped with claws that glinted in the torchlight. He reached out, slowly, deliberately, and touched my cheek. His touch was icy, sending a shiver down my spine. I felt a strange energy pulsing from him, a power that both terrified and fascinated me. "You have seen the ritual," he said, his voice a low, guttural growl. "You know the secret." He leaned closer, his face inches from mine. His breath, cold and reeking of the same ancient odor, washed over me. "Now," he whispered, his voice laced with a chilling promise, "you will share its burden." He smiled then, a slow, predatory grin that revealed teeth that were too sharp, too long, and in that moment, I knew that I was not going to escape this place. I knew that I was going to join Masao, or whatever he had become, in his rebirth. I knew that I was going to become a part of this ancient, horrifying ritual. The torchlight flickered, casting grotesque shadows that danced across the cave walls. And as the darkness closed in, I felt a cold hand grip my throat, and the last thing I saw was the cold, inhuman fire burning in the eyes of the thing that had once been my friend. I saw the ritual that gave samurai immortality. Part 14 of 25. The parchment crumbled in my trembling hands. The ink, now faded and smeared with my sweat, revealed the chilling finality of the ritual. It wasn't immortality in the traditional sense. It was a gruesome transference, a parasitic existence. The samurai didn't live on. Something else did, wearing their skin, inhabiting their memories, a grotesque mockery of life. The final stage of the ritual, detailed in archaic kanji, was the soul devouring. The chosen warrior, already imbued with the twisted essence of the kusarigama, would consume the heart of a newborn, a vessel untainted by the world, a clean slate for the entity to imprint upon. This act cemented the transformation, extinguishing the samurai's soul and ushering in the thing. My stomach churned. The faded illustrations on the parchment showed a figure, cloaked and hooded, holding a tiny, still form. A dark tendril snaking out from the figure's sleeve pierced the infant's chest. It wasn't a surgical procedure. It was a violation, a defilement of the purest innocence. I had to stop it. The idea of this ritual continuing, of more of these creatures being created, filled me with a dread so profound it felt physical. But how? I was alone, trapped in this desolate temple, with only the whispering wind and the rustling leaves for company. And somewhere out there, in the heart of the sprawling metropolis, the last descendant prepared. I reread the parchment, searching for a weakness, a flaw in the ritual. My eyes caught on a recurring symbol, a three-pointed star enclosed within a circle. It appeared throughout the text, etched beside each stage of the ritual. It wasn't explained, simply present, like a sinister watermark. Suddenly, a memory surfaced, a flash of the museum exhibit. A small, unassuming display case tucked away in a corner. Inside, a bronze amulet, identical to the symbol on the parchment. The description identified it as a protective ward against malevolent spirits. Could it be the key? Could this symbol, imbued with the right intent, disrupt the ritual? Hope, fragile and hesitant, flickered within me. I had to get to that museum. I had to get that amulet. I stumbled out of the temple, the setting sun casting long, ominous shadows across the overgrown path. The forest, once a sanctuary, now felt threatening, the rustling leaves whispering secrets I didn't want to hear. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper, and the forest seemed to close in around me. I pushed on, driven by a desperate urgency. I had to reach the city before nightfall. Before, a guttural growl ripped through the silence. I froze, my blood turning to ice. The growl came again, closer this time, followed by the snapping of twigs. Something was out there, something big, something hungry. I broke into a run, my heart pounding in my chest like a drum. The forest floor was uneven, roots and rocks snagging at my feet. I stumbled, falling hard, my hands scraping against the rough ground. I scrambled to my feet, but it was too late. A hulking shadow detached itself from the trees. It stood on two legs, its silhouette vaguely human, but distorted, grotesque. Its head was abnormally large, the features obscured by shadow, but I could see the glint of something sharp, something metallic, in its hand. A kusarigama. Terror choked me. This wasn't just some wild animal. This was one of Stutham, one of the things created by the ritual. It had found me. It let out another growl, a low, rumbling sound that vibrated through the ground. It took a step towards me, its movements unnervingly fluid, almost inhuman. The kusarigama swung at its side, a pendulum of death. I backed away, my mind racing, searching for a way out. There was nowhere to run, the trees pressing in on all sides. I was trapped. The creature lunged, the kusarigama whistling through the air. I ducked, narrowly avoiding the weighted chain, but the sharp sickle grazed my arm, tearing through my shirt and leaving a deep gash. Pain shot through me, but I couldn't afford to stop. I stumbled back, my eyes searching desperately for a weapon, anything to defend myself. My gaze landed on a fallen branch, thick and heavy. I snatched it up, gripping it with both hands. It wouldn't be much, but it was better than nothing. The creature lunged again, its eyes, now visible in the fading light, burning with a cold, inhuman fire. They were empty, devoid of any emotion, any semblance of humanity. Just a hollow, predatory gaze. It was the look of something that was no longer human, something else. I raised the branch, bracing myself for the impact. The kusarigama whistled through the air again, and everything went dark. I saw the ritual that gave samurai immortality, part 15. The parchment, brittle with age, crumbled slightly under my trembling fingers. The kanji, stained a disturbing rust brown, swam before my eyes. I had finally found it. The missing piece, the final horrific step in the ritual. The part omitted from all other texts. The part that chilled me to the bone. The flickering lantern light cast grotesque shadows on the cave walls, making the crude drawings depicting the ritual seem to writhe and pulse. The depictions of the samurai, willingly undergoing the transformation, had always unsettled me. But this final stage, it was a perversion of life itself. The text described a, quote, living sacrifice, a vessel to contain the overflowing power of the ritual. It wasn't an animal, not a willing participant. It was a child. A child of pure lineage, untouched by the world's corruption. The child was to be bound within the circle, its life force siphoned off to fuel the samurai's immortality. The parchment detailed the precise placement of the child, the specific incantations to be whispered, the exact moment when the samurai would plunge a ceremonial dagger, not to kill, but to create a conduit. A wave of nausea threatened to overwhelm me. This was beyond anything I could have imagined. This was not immortality, it was a monstrous theft. The implications were devastating. If the ritual required a constant supply of children, how many innocent lives had been extinguished to fuel this grotesque existence? How many families torn apart, their grief a silent testament to this unspeakable act? The cave air grew thick, stifling. I felt a presence, a cold, watchful gaze upon me. I looked up, heart hammering against my ribs, but saw nothing. Just the dancing shadows and the leering faces etched onto the cave walls. Yet the feeling of being observed intensified. It felt ancient, malevolent. I scrambled back, clutching the parchment to my chest. I had to get out, to escape the oppressive weight of this place. I stumbled to my feet, the lantern swinging wildly, casting distorted shadows that seemed to reach out and grasp at me. I could almost hear whispers in the darkness, whispers laced with the agony of the sacrificed children. As I fumbled my way towards the cave entrance, my foot struck something hard. I looked down. It was a small, intricately carved wooden doll. It was weathered and worn, but I recognized the design. It was a depiction of the ceremonial dagger described in the parchment. A chill colder than the cave air ran down my spine. This cave, it wasn't just a place where the ritual was performed. It was a shrine to this horrific practice. I picked up the doll, turning it over in my hands. The wood felt strangely warm, almost pulsing, and then I heard it, a soft, childish giggle. It echoed around the cave, bouncing off the walls, growing louder, more insistent. My breath hitched in my throat. I dropped the doll as if it were burning, scrambling back towards the entrance. The giggling continued, morphing into a high-pitched, chilling wail. The shadows seemed to coalesce, taking on more defined shapes. I could see them now, flickering figures in the darkness, their eyes burning with an unearthly light. Children. Their faces were gaunt, their bodies emaciated, but their eyes held an ancient, knowing sorrow. They reached out to me, their spectral fingers brushing against my skin. I recoiled, a scream, tearing its way from my throat. I had to get out, had to escape this nightmare. I stumbled through the narrow passage, the children's wails echoing behind me. I could feel their icy touch on my heels, their spectral forms closing in. I burst out of the cave mouth and into the cool night air, gasping for breath. The horrifying images still burned into my mind. I didn't stop running until I reached the edge of the forest, the flickering lights of the village, a welcome sight in the distance. I collapsed onto the ground, trembling, the parchment clutched tightly in my hand. Even in the relative safety of the village, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The chilling laughter of the children echoed in my ears, a constant reminder of the horrific truth I had uncovered. The samurai weren't just immortal. They were monsters, sustained by the stolen life force of innocent children. And now, I knew their secret. A secret that I was certain they wouldn't want shared. The question was, how could I possibly expose them, when their existence was woven into the very fabric of legend, and their power seemingly boundless? And more importantly, how could I protect myself from the retribution that was surely coming? The chilling realization dawned on me that discovering the truth might be my own death sentence. The hunt, I knew, had already begun. I saw the ritual that gave samurai immortality, Part 16. The amulet pulsed a sickly yellow. Its heat intensified against my skin, a burning brand that mirrored the rising panic in my chest. The whispers were louder now, less a rustling of leaves and more like rasping breaths against my ear. They spoke in a language I didn't understand, but the chilling intent was unmistakable. They wanted me to put it on. I clutched the amulet tighter, the jade smooth and cold under my sweaty fingers. Putting it on felt like surrendering, like accepting the horrific fate I'd glimpsed in that moonlit grove. But what choice did I have? The whispers promised power, promised an end to the nightmares that had plagued me since witnessing the ritual. They promised an escape from the growing dread that clung to me like a shroud. Slowly, with trembling hands, I lifted the amulet. The whispers crescendoed into a chorus of sibilant murmurs, weaving a tapestry of promises and threats. The air around me seemed to thicken, to vibrate with a strange energy. I could feel the eyes on me, unseen eyes watching from the shadows, waiting. Just before the jade touched my skin, a floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around, the amulet clutched to my chest, every nerve on fire. Standing in the doorway, bathed in the pale light from the hallway, was Mr. Tanaka. Relief washed over me, so potent it almost buckled my knees. He looked concerned, his brow furrowed, his usually impeccable suit slightly rumpled. "Are you all right, Mr. Davies?" he asked, his voice soft but edged with worry. I wanted to tell him everything, to pour out the terror that had consumed me for weeks, but the words wouldn't come. The amulet seemed to throb against my skin, a silent warning. I could feel the unseen eyes shift their attention to Mr. Tanaka, their whispers becoming sharp, laced with something cold and predatory. "Just a bad dream," I managed to croak, forcing a weak smile. "I'm fine now." He took a tentative step closer, his gaze fixed on the amulet in my hand. "What's that you have there?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Panic clawed at my throat. I shoved the amulet into my pocket, my hand closing around it protectively. "Nothing," I said a little too quickly. "Just a trinket." Mr. Tanaka didn't press the issue, but the concern in his eyes deepened. He lingered in the doorway for a moment longer, as if debating whether to say something more. Then, with a sigh, he turned and walked away. "If you need anything, please don't hesitate to call," he said over his shoulder. I waited until his footsteps faded before I let out a shaky breath. The whispers had subsided, but the heavy, oppressive feeling remained. I knew Mr. Tanaka suspected something, but he hadn't pushed it. Why? The question gnawed at me. He'd been so insistent on my integration into Japanese culture, so eager for me to embrace their traditions. Had he known about the ritual? Was he somehow involved? The thought sent a chill down my spine. I'd trusted Mr. Tanaka, relied on him to navigate this unfamiliar world. But now, a seed of doubt had been planted. Could he be another piece of this terrifying puzzle? I pulled the amulet from my pocket, the jade cool against my trembling fingers. The whispers started again, faint at first, then growing stronger. They were insistent, seductive, promising me an end to my fear. They promised power. They promised immortality. I looked around the room, at the shadows that danced in the corners, at the closed windows that seemed to suffocate me. I felt trapped, hunted, and the amulet, despite the terror it inspired, felt like the only way out. I knew I shouldn't. Every instinct screamed at me to throw the amulet away, to run as far from this place as I could. but the whispers were relentless, weaving their way into my thoughts, twisting my fear into a perverse kind of desire. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, I raised the amulet to my neck. My fingers fumbled with the clasp, the jade burning against my skin. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for something. I didn't know what, but I knew it would change everything. As the clasp clicked shut, a wave of cold washed over me. The whispers erupted into a cacophony of voices, all speaking at once, their words merging into a single, overwhelming roar. The room spun, the shadows twisted into grotesque shapes, and the air crackled with an unseen energy. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped. The whispers faded, the room stilled, and the shadows retreated. I opened my eyes, my heart pounding in my chest. The amulet hung heavy around my neck, radiating a faint, pulsating warmth. I felt different, stronger. The fear that had been my constant companion for weeks was gone, replaced by a strange sense of calm, of power. I looked at my hands, flexing my fingers. They seemed sharper, more defined. I looked in the mirror. My eyes, usually a dull brown, now shimmered with an unnatural golden light. A slow smile spread across my face. The amulet had worked. I was no longer just David Davies, the terrified outsider. I was something more. I was becoming something more. And somewhere, deep down, a voice whispered that this was only the beginning. I saw the ritual that gave samurai immortality, Part 17. The air grew thick, a cloying sweetness that wasn't floral or fruity, but something visceral. It clung to the back of my throat, making me gag. The chanting, once a distant thrum, intensified, resonating through the very bedrock of the island. I pressed further into the crevice, the sharp edges of the rock digging into my flesh, a welcome distraction from the mounting dread. I could feel the tremors now, not just hear them. The entire island seemed to be shuddering, a living creature waking from a long sleep. Peeking through the narrow gap again, I saw the platform bathed in an unsettling crimson light. The source was not fire, but the blood. It pulsed, a sickening heartbeat in the center of the intricate markings, forming a vortex that spun faster and faster. The chanting reached a fever pitch, the masked figures swaying like reeds in a violent wind. Then, the figure in the center moved. He, or it, rose, slowly, deliberately, the crimson light reflecting off the dull metal of his armor. The helmet remained, obscuring any features, but the sheer presence emanating from the figure was overwhelming. He raised his hands, the same gnarled skeletal hands I'd seen in the scrolls, and the chanting ceased abruptly. A silence, deeper than any I had ever known, descended upon the island. The only sound was the sickening squelch of the blood. It was then that I saw them. Emerging from the swirling vortex of blood, like grotesque butterflies from a gruesome cocoon, were figures. Humanoid, but wrong. Their skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched tight over sharp bones. Their eyes glowed with an unnatural inner light, the same crimson as the blood. They moved with a jerky, unsettling grace, their limbs bending at unnatural angles. These were the immortals, the products of the ritual. The central figure, the one I assumed had performed the ceremony, gestured towards the masked figures. The newly emerged immortals moved with terrifying speed, their movements a blur. I heard a series of sickening cracks, wet thuds, and then silence. The masked figures lay scattered across the platform, their bodies contorted at unnatural angles, lifeless, empty vessels. The central figure turned towards the edge of the platform, facing the direction of the village. I ducked back into the crevice, my heart hammering against my ribs. I knew with a chilling certainty that he could sense me. He knew I was watching. The silence stretched, each second an eternity. I could hear my own ragged breath, the blood pounding in my ears. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself to disappear, to become one with the rock. Then, a sound. A slow, deliberate scraping sound, like metal against stone. It was getting closer. I risked another peek. The central figure was descending the steps, his movements stiff, almost mechanical. The newly created immortals followed, their glowing eyes fixed on the village below. They moved with a single purpose, a chillingly efficient predator stalking its prey. I knew I had to warn the villagers, but how? I was trapped, exposed, and facing an army of immortal beings. Even if I could escape, the villagers were no match for these creatures. They were lambs led to the slaughter. The scraping sound stopped. He was close, too close. I pressed myself further into the crevice, the sharp rocks tearing at my clothes, my skin. I could feel the vibrations in the ground as he approached, each step sending a fresh wave of terror through me. Then, a voice, low, rasping, emanating from just beyond the crevice. It spoke in a language I didn't understand, yet somehow I knew exactly what it meant. You have seen too much. The ground trembled, and a hand, skeletal and impossibly strong, reached into the crevice. Its long, bony fingers brushed against my cheek, cold as death. I closed my eyes, bracing for the inevitable. This was the end. I had witnessed the ritual, the terrible secret of the samurai's immortality, and now I would pay the price. But the hand retreated. I cautiously opened my eyes, peering through the narrow gap. The figure was gone. The immortals were gone. The only evidence of their presence was the blood-soaked platform and the broken bodies of the masked figures. The silence returned, heavier this time, pregnant with an unspoken threat. I knew I had been spared, but for what purpose? What did they want from me? I was a witness, a liability. They wouldn't let me go that easily. The chilling realization dawned on me. This wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. They had let me live, not out of mercy, but as a pawn in their gruesome game. And I had a terrifying feeling that I was about to find out what role I was meant to play. I saw the ritual that gave samurai immortality. Part 18 of 25. The rain, a ceaseless, icy drizzle, plastered my hair to my forehead. The temple, once a beacon of serenity, now loomed like a skeletal finger pointing accusingly at the bruised sky. I clung to the rough stone wall, each breath a ragged gasp. Inside, the chanting had reached a fever pitch, a guttural, rhythmic roar that resonated in my bones. It was a sound that promised power, but at a cost I was no longer sure I wanted to comprehend. I'd been following Kenji, or rather, the shell that housed Kenji, for days. He moved with a terrifying grace, his eyes vacant, yet focused on some distant, unseen goal. The boy I knew, the one who had shared rice cakes and whispered dreams of adventure, was gone, replaced by something other. The entrance to the inner sanctum was guarded by two figures cloaked in black. They stood motionless, their faces hidden by ornate masks depicting snarling oni. I recognized the crimson stain on the masks, the same stain that had coated the obsidian blade during the ritual, the blood of the willing sacrifice, the blood that fueled this unnatural longevity. My hand instinctively went to the small, worn, leather-bound book I carried. It contained the fragmented knowledge I'd gleaned from my grandfather's journals, the rituals, the whispers, the warnings. According to the text, there was a way to sever the connection, to break the cycle of immortality. But the price, even now, I hesitated. Fear gnawed at me. Fear of the unknown, fear of Kenji's fate, fear of the power that pulsated within those temple walls. But a stronger emotion burned beneath it. The desperate hope that I could still save him. I slipped through the shadows, clinging to the periphery of the temple courtyard. The rain masked my movements. The chanting drowned out the rustle of my clothes against the stone. I reached a small, barred window, offering a glimpse into the inner sanctum. The scene within made my blood run cold. Kenji stood at the center of a circle etched into the stone floor. The obsidian blade, now pulsating with an eerie inner light, hovered above him. Around him, the robed figures chanted, their voices rising and falling in a hypnotic rhythm. The air shimmered with an unseen energy, a palpable force that seemed to distort the very fabric of reality. And then I saw her. Bound to a stone altar, her eyes wide with terror, was Hana, Kenji's younger sister. The sacrifice. My heart lurched. I had been a fool. I had focused so intently on Kenji that I hadn't considered the ritual's other requirement, the source of the life force that sustained the immortality. The chanting reached a crescendo. The obsidian blade descended. I couldn't let this happen. With a primal scream, I threw myself against the barred window. The metal shrieked in protest, bending under the force of my desperation. The chanting faltered, replaced by a stunned silence. The robed figures turned, their masked faces swiveling towards the source of the interruption. I ripped at the bars, tearing my fingers in the process. One by one they gave way, twisting and groaning under my frantic efforts. Finally, with a deafening clang, the last bar snapped. I stumbled into the sanctum, the cold stone biting into my palms. All eyes were on me. The chanting ceased entirely. The obsidian blade hung suspended inches above Hana's chest, its ethereal glow casting an eerie light on her terrified face. Kenji turned towards me. His eyes, once filled with warmth and laughter, were now cold, devoid of emotion. He didn't recognize me. He didn't recognize anyone. "Stop!" I screamed, my voice hoarse. "Don't do this!" The robed figures began to move, closing in on me, their movements unnervingly synchronized. I knew I was outnumbered, outmatched. But I couldn't back down. I pulled the leather-bound book from my pocket, flipping through the brittle pages, searching for the ritual of severance. The words blurred before my eyes, the ancient script swimming in a sea of fear and adrenaline. "The bond can be broken," I whispered, my voice trembling, "but only by the willing sacrifice of the immortal." Kenji took a step towards me. The obsidian blade inched lower, closer to Hana's still beating heart. The rain continued to fall, a mournful dirge echoing the despair that threatened to consume me. I knew what I had to do, and I knew I might not survive it. But I had to try, for Kenji, for Hana, for the memory of the boy who had once been my friend. The robed figures closed in, their shadows stretching across the floor like grasping claws. The air crackled with anticipation. The obsidian blade pulsed, a beacon of darkness in the heart of the storm. And the ritual began anew. I saw the ritual that gave samurai immortality, Part 19. The air hung heavy with the stench of brine and something older, something primal, as I followed Kenji deeper into the cavern. He carried the lantern, its flickering light painting grotesque shadows on the slick moss-covered walls. We hadn't spoken since leaving the beach, the silence punctuated only by the drip of water and the distant, rhythmic crash of the waves. My mind replayed the horrifying scene on the shore, the contorted bodies of the villagers, their vacant eyes reflecting the dying embers of the bonfire. The chanting, the inhuman shriek, it echoed in my ears, a chilling reminder of the darkness we were wading deeper into. Kenji stopped abruptly, holding the lantern aloft. Before us, the cavern opened into a vast chamber, the ceiling lost in the shadows above. A massive, circular platform dominated the space, carved from the same dark stone as the cavern walls. In the center of the platform, a single, flickering torch illuminated a shallow basin filled with a viscous, black liquid. The air here was thick, almost suffocating, and vibrated with a low, resonant hum. "This is where it happened," Kenji whispered, his voice strained. He gestured towards the basin. "The ritual." I swallowed, my throat dry. The immortality ritual?" Kenji nodded slowly. "My ancestor. He saw it with his own eyes. He documented everything." He tapped the leather-bound book clutched in his other hand. "But those villagers," I stammered, the image of their twisted forms seared into my memory. "They weren't immortal." Kenji's face contorted in a grimace. "They were offerings, fuel for the ritual." My stomach churned. "Fuel!" "The ritual demands a terrible price," Kenji said, his voice barely above a whisper. He stepped onto the platform, his boots echoing eerily in the vast chamber. I hesitated, a knot of dread tightening in my chest. Every instinct screamed at me to turn and run, to flee this cursed place. But I knew I couldn't. I had come too far. I needed to understand. I followed Kenji onto the platform, the stone cold beneath my feet. He approached the basin, the black liquid within swirling gently as if alive. He held the lantern closer, and I saw that the surface was not smooth but covered in tiny, writhing tendrils. I recoiled, a wave of nausea washing over me. This is, I stammered, unable to find the words to describe the horrifying concoction. The elixir of eternity, Kenji said, his eyes fixed on the swirling liquid, forged from the essence of, well, let's just say things best left undisturbed. He opened the leather-bound book, his hands trembling. The pages were yellowed and brittle, the ink faded but still legible. He began to read aloud, his voice a low monotone, translating the ancient text. The words were strange, archaic, filled with references to forgotten gods and cosmic alignments. As he read, the air in the chamber grew colder, the humming intensifying. The tendrils in the black liquid pulsed and writhed with renewed vigor. The ritual, as described in the book, was a complex and horrifying affair. It involved chanting, sacrifices, and the precise alignment of celestial bodies. The villagers, Kenji explained, were not merely sacrifices but integral components of the ritual. Their life force, their very essence, was consumed by the elixir, fueling its transformative power. As Kenji continued to read, I noticed a change in him. His eyes, previously filled with fear and apprehension, now gleamed with a strange, almost fanatical light. His voice grew stronger, more resonant, as if he were not merely reading but channeling the ancient words themselves. He reached the final passage, the culmination of the ritual. The words, even translated, were chilling, describing the final, agonizing transformation. The recipient of the elixir, bathed in the moonlight filtered through a specific crevice in the cavern roof, would be consumed by an unbearable agony, their body contorting and reshaping, their very being rewritten by the dark magic of the elixir. Kenji finished reading, closing the book with a snap. He looked at me, his eyes burning with an unsettling intensity. "Do you understand now?" he asked, his voice low and resonant. "The price of immortality?" I stared at him, my mind reeling. The ritual, the sacrifices, the horrifying transformation, it was almost too much to comprehend. But one question burned in my mind, a question that chilled me to the bone. "Kenji," I whispered, my voice trembling, "why are you showing me this? Why are you telling me all of this?" He smiled, a slow, chilling smile that spread across his face like a crack in the earth. He raised his hand, and in the flickering lantern light, I saw that he held a small, obsidian knife. The blade glinted, reflecting the black, swirling liquid in the basin. "Because," he said, his voice now a chilling whisper, "the ritual, it needs to be performed again." I saw the ritual that gave samurai immortality, Part 20. The chanting swelled again, resonating with a nauseating power that made my stomach churn. The air itself felt heavy, charged with something ancient and unclean. I pressed myself harder against the slick cave wall, the cold stone a meager comfort against the rising terror. Masao stood before the altar, bathed in the flickering, unnatural light of the brazier. He looked different, his eyes wider, pupils dilated, consumed by a hollow emptiness that chilled me to the bone. The chanting intensified, morphing into a single, piercing note that resonated deep within my skull. The ground trembled, dust and small pebbles falling from the cave ceiling. Then, with a sound like tearing silk, the veil between worlds seemed to thin. The shadows in the cave deepened, writhing and coalescing into grotesque, inhuman shapes. They danced in the periphery of my vision, whispers of movement that made my skin crawl. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything but witness this unholy spectacle, but I was paralyzed, rooted to the spot by a morbid fascination. Masao raised his arms, his voice joining the chanting, a low, guttural sound that seemed to vibrate from within his very bones. He reached behind him and, with agonizing slowness, drew the blade of the katana from its scabbard. The steel glinted in the firelight. not with a normal gleam, but with an unsettling, internal luminescence. The chanting ceased abruptly, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. The only sound was Masao's ragged breathing and the soft crackle of the brazier. He turned, his eyes, now completely black, fixed on the bound figure on the altar. The man, still gagged, thrashed against his restraints, his eyes wide with terror. I realized with a jolt that I recognized him. It was Tanaka, the missing fisherman. Masao raised the katana high above his head, the blade seeming to absorb the flickering light, becoming a beacon of pure, malevolent energy. He paused, and for a moment I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, a sliver of the man he once was, trapped within that abyss of darkness. Then it was gone, swallowed by the consuming emptiness. He brought the blade down. I squeezed my eyes shut, unable to watch. The sound, though muffled by the cave walls, was sickening. A wet thud, followed by a choked gurgle. I could smell the coppery tang of blood, thick and cloying in the air. When I finally forced myself to look, bile rose in my throat. Tanaka lay still, his chest a gaping wound, the lifeblood spilling onto the altar stone. The dark symbols carved into the surface seemed to drink the blood greedily, glowing with an infernal crimson light. The shadows around the cave writhed with renewed vigor, their whispers becoming louder, closer. Masao stood over the body, the katana dripping with blood. He lowered the blade and, to my horror, began to drink from it, licking the blood from the steel with a chilling, animalistic fervor. He then dipped his fingers into the pooling blood on the altar and smeared it across his forehead, drawing a crude symbol that mirrored the ones carved into the stone. As he finished, the ground shook violently. The brazier toppled over, plunging the cave into near darkness. I could hear the shadows closing in, their whispers now guttural snarls, their forms becoming more defined, more monstrous. They were no longer mere shadows. They were something else, something ancient and malevolent, drawn to this place by the ritual. Panic seized me. I scrambled back, my hands scrabbling against the slick cave walls. I had to get out, had to escape this nightmare, but the entrance was blocked by Masao, who now stood bathed in the eerie crimson glow of the altar. He looked up, his black eyes locking onto mine, and a chilling smile spread across his face. He no longer looked human. His features were sharper, more angular, almost demonic. "You have seen too much," he rasped, his voice deeper, laced with an inhuman resonance. "Now you must join us." He raised the bloody katana, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I wouldn't survive this night. The shadows surged forward, their claws reaching, their snarls echoing through the cave. I closed my eyes, bracing for the inevitable, the chilling words of the ancient scroll echoing in my mind. Immortality is a curse, not a gift, and the price is everything. The last thing I felt was the cold, sharp steel of the katana against my skin. Then, darkness. I saw the ritual that gave samurai immortality, Part 21. The earth beneath the temple pulsed with a sickening, organic rhythm. The chanting, which had been a low hum, rose into a cacophony, a discordant chorus that clawed at the edges of sanity. The air grew thick, heavy with a metallic tang of blood, and something else, something ancient and foul. The braziers flared, casting grotesque, dancing shadows that seemed to mimic the movements of the masked figures. I pressed myself further into the shadows, the rough stone of the temple wall digging into my back, my breath hitched in my throat, each inhale a struggle against the oppressive atmosphere. The fear was a physical thing now, a cold, clammy hand squeezing my heart. The chanting reached a crescendo, then abruptly ceased. A silence descended, so profound it was almost deafening. It was the silence of anticipation, the hush before a storm. The masked figures froze, their bodies rigid, their attention focused on the central dais. The braziers sputtered, casting flickering light on the scene, and then I saw it. The figure on the dais, the one bathed in the sickly green light, began to move. It had been utterly still for what felt like an eternity, a statue carved from shadow. But now It twitched. Its head, crowned with that grotesque antlered helm, slowly lifted. A low groan echoed through the chamber, emanating not from the figure itself, but from the earth beneath the temple. The stone floor beneath me vibrated, a tremor that intensified with each passing second. Cracks spiderwebbed across the surface, spreading outward from the dais like veins. The figure rose, its movements stiff and jerky. It was tall, impossibly tall, its form shrouded in the darkness in the flickering green light. It raised its arms, and the sleeves of its dark robes fell away, revealing hands, or what were once hands. They were gnarled and twisted, more akin to the claws of some monstrous beast than anything human. Then the figure spoke. The voice was not human. It was a guttural rasp, a sound that seemed to scrape against the very fabric of reality. It spoke in a language I didn't understand, a series of clicks and guttural sounds that resonated deep within my bones.